Objective: to understand atomic spectrum and types of spectra. Think it over. We know that the ultimate source of energy to human life is the sun. A large amount of energy is emitted from the sun as a result of nuclear reactions that take place within it. After hydrogen, helium is the second most abundant element present in the sun. We also know that scientists left some gaps in the periodic table predicting their properties even before their discovery. Do you know how helium, found to be present in the sun, and other unknown elements of the periodic table were identified or discovered? This topic unveils the mystery of the discovery of these elements. Spectrum: a ray of white light from the sun or an incandescent lamp, when passed through a glass prism, is dispersed into a continuous array of 7 colors, just as in a rainbow in the order referred to as Vibgyor. It is observed that in a spectrum, the radiation with lower wavelength bends more than those with higher wavelength. That's why we see violet, which has a lower wavelength of 400 nanometers at the bottom of the spectrum, and red with a higher wavelength of 700 nanometers at the top of the spectrum. Types of spectra. Rainbow is the most common example of a spectrum that is visible to our naked eye. Rainbow is comprised of 7 colors that constitute white light. These colored bands merge into each other. Therefore, the spectrum of ordinary white light is called a continuous spectrum. Electromagnetic radiation includes a range of wavelengths. The arrangement of these radiations of varying wavelengths in a particular order constitutes the electromagnetic spectrum. When electromagnetic radiation interacts with matter, atoms, and molecules, they absorb some part of the radiation and go to a higher, unstable energy state called the excited state. As the atoms are unstable in their excited state, they tend to revert to the original state, called the ground state, by emitting the same amount of energy absorbed earlier. This energy is emitted in a single step or in multiple steps. Depending on the amount of energy emitted, the radiation of a particular wavelength is obtained. The spectrum of the radiation thus emitted by an atom is called its emission spectrum. In contrast to the continuous spectrum of white light, an emission spectrum is usually discontinuous, with dark spaces between bright lines. Such a spectrum is called a line spectrum. The bright lines of the emission spectrum exist due to the fact that the emitted radiations are only of specific wavelengths, rather than a continuous spread of wavelength as in the case of white light. A photographic negative of the emission spectrum is known as the absorption spectrum. It is recorded by passing a continuum of radiation through a sample which absorbs radiation of certain wavelengths. The missing wavelengths correspond to the radiation absorbed by the matter, leaving dark spaces in the bright continuous spectrum. Unlike the emission spectrum, absorption spectrum consists of a series of dark lines in the bright continuous spectrum. The study of emission or absorption spectra to determine the molecular structure of compounds is known as spectroscopy. Spectroscopy is used in identifying unknown elements. Emission spectrum is sometimes also called atomic spectrum. This is because each atom has a unique emission spectrum, just as we have unique fingerprints. These characteristic lines in an atomic spectrum can therefore be used in chemical analysis to identify unknown atoms. German chemist Robert Bunsen was one of the first investigators who used atomic spectra to identify elements. Elements like rubidium, cesium, thallium, indium, gallium, and scandium were discovered when their minerals were analyzed using the spectroscopic method. The presence of helium was also detected in the Sun using the spectroscopic method. Summary: a spectrum is a range of different colors produced when light passes through a glass prism. In a continuous spectrum, the colored bands are merged together. The emission spectrum is the spectrum of the frequencies of electromagnetic radiation emitted due to an atom or molecule making a transition from a high-energy state to a low-energy state. A spectrum of electromagnetic radiation transmitted through a substance showing dark lines or bands due to absorption at specific wavelengths is called an absorption spectrum. An emission spectrum consisting of separate isolated lines is called a line spectrum.